Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Collaberwocky, where we have conversations about collaboration. I'm Jim Benson from Modus Cooperandi and Personal Kanban, and today, as with the previous 3 episodes, we are talking to Corey Ladas and Jabe Bloom. Jabe is the CTO of the Library Corporation. Corey is the author of the book Scrumban and a pioneer in lean thinking for software. And today our conversation is about failure. The ticket is called Failure is an Option.
I'd kind of like to do the failure is an option one because I think it's maybe a little bit different. Different
than what we've talked about thus far?
Different sort of style of topic than, because we've been focusing on a lot of kind of people management type of stuff, and
okay. All right.
And the failure one is kind of a little bit more about business value decisions. I mean, there's going to be a big people part of it as well, but it's a little bit more technocratic.
Okay. All right. Well, there it is. Failure is an option. Avoiding the feature race. Jabe, you want to intro that?
So, failure is an option. This is failure is an option. This topic is intended to kind of explore this idea as a culture. We really don't like failure at all. We don't accept failure. We almost always set out to be successful in all circumstances. The result of this, I think, is increasingly that people are successful at producing suboptimal results. In fact, what they do is they get about halfway through and they figure out that the result isn't going to be all that great, but they don't stop. They keep going because they can't fail. So I think I love to kind of explore and talk about how do we figure out when to stop things? How do we figure out how to fail appropriately? How do we, and not only that, but how do we actually take things out of a marketplace? So, a big concern that we have as a company ends up being, if we release something and we support it, if anybody's using it, how do we call that person up and say, listen, this wasn't a very good idea, I'm sorry, can't have it anymore. That's a hard conversation to have. So, fail. How do you actually fail? How do you fail in the management structures that we currently have?
Right. One of the concerns that I've had recently with the lean startup movement is that there's been this big fail fast aesthetic, and everybody's been talking about how great it is to fail. But I am not convinced that they actually understand the scientific method at all.
Yes.
So they're rushing out to run these experiments, but they don't actually know how to set an experiment up, how to receive data back that tells them success or failure. So what I see is a ton of startups, this is my prediction, running around completely ODing on experimenters' bias.
Right. So, I mean, you can take that as a license to kind of take risk without regard to consequence.
Yeah.
That's like, any random ass idea that we can come up with is valuable because, hey, failure is okay.
Well, either that or they set up, they do nothing but repeatedly set up experiments that will support their original hypothesis. I believe that drinking water is good, therefore I'm going to drink some water. Oh, I didn't die. Drinking water is good. But how much water, wasn't part of that, and one of the things that and there was no control, there was no, extremes on either end. The other night I went to go see a gentleman named David Huron speak, and he is a psychomusicologist, and one of the experiments that he ran was that certain types of music would be soothing to people. And he was right. And so somebody in the audience said, if you were so sure you were going to be right, why did you run the experiment? He said, to find out if I was right. And so I don't think that to most people they quite understand the when you sign up for a scientific business process, you're signing up for a level of rigor that it might be a lot more than what you expect. And then on the other side of that coin is the people that you're talking about, Jabe, who never set up experiments and they just do something until their company closes.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, some of this is like sort of verificationism versus falsificationism, right? It's like you should make everybody, listen to a 1-hour lecture on Karl Popper before they're allowed to, attempt to do a lean startup kind of arrangement. Or it's like the thing that Don Reinertson, figured out 15 years ago that, if you're going to set up that kind of experimental method for product features or concepts, you're really shooting for 50%.
Yep.
Right, and you shouldn't just take that as a blind rule to follow. You should know why that's such an insightful thing. You should know why that's true. Because it is true. Once you hear it, it's like, well, yes, of course you should shoot for 50%.
Yeah. The other thing that I keep on talking about with people, I tell this story. So my kid got a razor, right? So he's 4. It's like, learning to ride it. And, he falls over a couple times. And then, he basically says, ow, that hurts. I don't like it when I fall over. And I said, yeah, you have to learn, how to balance. Comes back to me and he says, yeah, it's funny. I can feel myself about to fall over and then I kind of stop and then I don't fall down. And that's actually the type of failure that we want to have. Like if you fall down on the ground and hit your head, yes, you failed. But that's not actually productive failure, right? Like the productive failure we want people to start experiencing is the sensation, I'm losing my balance, I need to correct, right? And certainly for lean startup type stuff, that's the type of can you actually catch the business before it fails?
Right.
And for me, for the product, for the feature race type stuff, does every feature that we build, are they all successful? How do you actually measure and determine when to stop, when to actually say this isn't going to work, that I'm going to fall down, instead of actually hitting the ground?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
So I mean, is part of this understanding a couple of things. One is that every single business plan ever has experimenter's bias. It's written saying, I'm going to do this thing, and this is how I'm going to do it. Give me money and watch me.
Yeah, the incentives are wrong, right? I mean, most businesses are set up with incentives that sort of undermine real scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd take, a hellaciously enlightened management team in order to set that up in the right way.
Mm.
I mean, it's one of the more insightful things I think. What's his name? I can't remember his name right now. That's terrible. The guy who wrote the lead, Eric. So, one of the insightful things that Eric basically says about the lean startup is that really the book was written for venture capitalists. And actually it was even more specifically written for the people who fund venture capitalists. Because the only way to change that system, like you're discussing, is to change the way that people invest in venture capital, right? Mm-hmm. So,
and the assumptions that they have when they go in. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. So if we could change the way that happens, if we could look at people and say, instead of, this is a good idea that'll make money, kind of this, we're able to predict the future type stuff, if we could stop trying to predict the future for the basis of investment and more successfully, integrate and think about how to measure other ways to measure success. So other ways of how would I know whether or not to invest in you? Well, you're smart. You're not stuck on the one idea. You have some understanding of the scientific method, maybe a measurement. There's all sorts of different measures that we could probably have that have nothing to do with trying to evaluate whether or not your business plan will be successful. Because that's probably not a good way of doing it.
Right.
Right. Because that comes back around to the intentional cooperation thing we were talking about earlier, right? That what we've done is we've set up a system that's begging to be gamed, and then we're surprised when people game it and we get poor outcomes. How about let's design a system that, produces outcomes that we like and does that on purpose?
Yes.
Yeah, it was like the startup that I worked for, where they were running around and they'd set a release date based on when they were going to get their next round of funding. And the release date never had any grounding in reality. There was no way we could release the product. The release date was set up there. The number of people in the company were set up in such a way that everything was structured simply to get more money. It had nothing to do with actually producing something. So yeah, it was a horrific thing to watch, an absolute gaming of a very, very broken venture capitalist system. Very depressing.
So hopefully one of the good things that we'll see out of this, the lean startup movement, I hope one of the positive things will be venture capitalists evaluating teams and groups of people based on the performance of the team as opposed to the performance of the business plan, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, that was a dumb idea. We shouldn't have invested in that, but we're going to invest in you again because you have a new good idea. That would be valuable.
I like that a lot. I mean, in some ways, that's a restatement of the thesis of built to last. Mm-hmm. Right, that the best, most enduring companies set out to be great companies and didn't necessarily set out to produce X variety of widgets.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, my brain is pushing me back to a regression towards the mean problem.
Yeah.
And so. What I see is that most businesses fail, like close up shop and go off and do something else. Sometimes that's planned, but very seldom. How do we introduce in a healthy way the assumption that and not just as a casual offhand, oh yeah, most of these are going to fail, that's why we spread our money around. How do we make something constructive out of the fact that there is an average rate of success, and that rate of success might waver, but it's not going to radically change?
Yeah, so I think there's a model for what we're talking about, right? And I'm not necessarily sure I like all the politics of Hollywood, but, when you make a film, first of all, there's an assumption that a significant amount of films are going to fail. The best directors in the world have made films that have been awful and made no money, right? And as a director, you go out and you assemble a group of people to make a film. You temporarily band together, you produce the creative work, and then it kind of lives on its life after that. What if we had a model more like that? If we want to explore kind of these small niches and create work like this, like kind of the lean startup style work, what if we had a model that was more like that, where the goal or the value that you bring as kind of the person to invest in, so like the director of a program, is somebody who kind of knows the right people, can pull the right people into a room for a temporary thing that creates value and experiments with that value to see whether or not it's going to work or not. And then maybe there's some, that team would go off and build something else, but another team would come in to kind of carry it on once it got past that. I mean, right. Is there a specialty, I guess, in this idea of having a group of people who are really talented at doing that initial investigation? Mm. And could we create an environment, an ecosystem around those people that would support rapid innovation in lots of different ways. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like you talked about your employee colleague that didn't want to come to the group meeting because he just wanted to focus and didn't want the big group experience. It seems to me that just as there are lots of different categories of people, there's a group of people out there who are really interested in taking on weird new challenges that shouldn't be possible and working on them in a collaborative, no holds barred way. And then there's another group of people that want to take that idea after it's been solidified and then make it into the most solid, stable platform that it can be. So I don't want to call it I will. I'm not happy with these words, but there's like an invention mentality and a maintenance mentality.
Yep.
And there's a billion sub-elements of that, certainly. But I mean, we see this, I think we see this at play all the time. And might go back to actually our first conversation. We're talking about intentional cooperation.
Yeah, I mean, I like Mike Burroughs's talking a lot right now about developing capabilities. So what if we had teams that were capable of doing things? What they owned was their capability of producing things. Too many people now own ideas, right? So like too many people who are good at being startup people who are good at exploring ideas, they get hooked on this idea that I finally found my idea and that's the important thing, as opposed to I finally developed a team that's capable of executing these things, right? And maybe that would be more interesting for us to kind of try to figure out how to emphasize capability over business plans or ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I used to like to say is that, when you ship something, when you produce a product, you're really producing two things. You're producing the product, but you're also producing the process that produced the product, and both of those things have value. And too many people get sort of hung up on the concrete result of the thing, but actually the more valuable thing was that you acquired the ability you've demonstrated that you have the ability to produce products of that quality, which means that you might be able to do it again.
Yep. And I mean, how many people are just bashing their faces against walls because they're like, I came here because it was exciting and I was doing those things, and now I'm just grinding the Facebook wheel, right? Like, how many people at Facebook are just like, really, I'm gonna refine the like button again? That's what I'm doing for the rest of my life?
Right.
I'm gonna kill myself.
Right. Yeah, it's like, yeah, you think about it, it's like, wow, that Princeton degree really paid off.
Exactly. I don't know. That's just me. I think it's hard. So inside my company, like, the entrepreneurship stuff is really hard. It's really difficult to do. It's something that might be interesting for more people to explore too. I don't know that you just need to explore these ideas that we're talking about inside of the venture capital community. Mm-hmm. I think it's possible to do this stuff inside companies and find the people inside your company that value these ideas and give them a platform for doing it. I mean, this stuff is all wrapped around the innovator's dilemma stuff as well, right? So, like, how do you diversify your concepts inside of your organization so that you're kind of inoculating yourself against the market a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing that, if you're developing a lot of ideas to inoculate yourself, make sure you're killing some of them off, because otherwise you're going to end up with, a bunch of little tribbles running around the house, and you're going to have to feed all of them, and that will kill you as well. So,
yeah. So this one thing that you have been rather successful at, Jabe, is taking, especially in your product owner group, people who were very focused on kind of a very narrow view of what was possible with the product, and very much stuck in a maintenance mentality. You've managed to create a group of now product owners who don't even like the product owner word anymore because they're focused on things beyond their products. They're actually focused on the company and issues with the company. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I can try. I think, the change in the product owner group, I think the most radical change was when they started working together as a team at the product owner level. So they have their own Kanban board, they think together as a group, and, like all Kanban boards that are visual instruments, they started to see patterns, I think, in the way that the work was moving and kind of clustering ideas together. And then they were like, well, if you're doing that right now, well, I have that problem too, and maybe we should do it together. And that started to kind of coalesce these ideas into, instead of each product having different features and each product owner owning a product, that what they were doing, what they decided to do was own problems, which was different because the problem could be across multiple products. And what would that mean and how would that work? And that really was pretty radical for them, and I think pretty radical for me as well, because what it allowed them to do is really start kind of talking about all the problems at the company level as opposed to the product level. And then from there, they were able to actually go to the customers and talk to the customers from the company level as opposed to the product level, which meant that they had a much more focused message. They were able to talk to them about the problem completely, because what would happen before was, if there was a problem across multiple products, something, completely fake, like you'd need to be able to log in with the same password. They break it down to the product level, and each product owner would call a customer and say, I need to know how you log in. And they'd be like, don't you know I can't log into this thing or that thing? And they'd be like, yeah, don't talk to me about that, because I don't own that product. And that was really frustrating for the customers. It was really frustrating for them. And not only that, but it really sent a message to the customers that we don't want you to tell us what your real problems are. We want you to answer the questions that we're asking you, which, again, hides a lot of weird issues. It gives you really big blinders.
Stop giving me information and answer my questions.
Exactly. Stop telling me what the problem is and answer my question. I know the answer already. I just need you to confirm it, please. So I think that was pretty radical for me. The product owners themselves were always kind of they were always a really creative group. Like, they were always interested in being creative and creating new stuff. Another thing that it's done, frankly, is it's built Slack in very useful ways. So they spend a lot more time thinking about what they're going to do next, as opposed to in the feature race constantly. Which means that I think that we get fewer but much higher quality features. So, is that useful?
Yeah, it's awesome.
I'm going to say something exceptionally nerdy here, which is that Jabe's story was actually an awesome example of how a stag hunt game moves from the risk-weighted to the payoff-weighted Nash equilibria. And I'd like to record it just for that, because it's a great story.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it was very funny to me, because it flopped over on itself. And it was one of the few times that I really was able to back out of that situation pretty quickly. Now with that group, I mainly talk to them about how to be innovative. So they call me in when they want to be like, how would we think about this? Not what should we think about or what should the next feature be, but like, how should we think about making a feature? Yeah. Which is a lot more fun for me, frankly, because, I used to tell them all the time, like, You keep on asking me what you should build next. I don't have a clue what you should build next. I have no idea. You talk to the customers all the time. You use the software all the time. I don't have any idea what to build next at all. That was really frustrating.
Well, and what's cool about that is how is your relationship with that group of people changed?
Right. I mean, again, to me, the really significant change for me, on a personal level, is that they now ask me questions that I value answering, if that makes sense, right? So like, oh, now you're asking questions that you'd ask to a CTO, as opposed to asking questions that you should have answered yourselves, right? Mm-hmm. Which was incredibly frustrating for me, and I had no idea how to get them over it until I, stumbled around it. But it really is, it's so much more pleasant, really, to frankly work with people who value you for what you value in you, if that makes sense, right? Like, absolutely. Oh, you guys see me the way I see me. I like that. So that's kind of cool. I don't know, maybe I've just beaten them into submission. I don't know. I don't think so.
No, I mean, because the thing is that now people are a lot happier. So. That's one of the first things I notice when we show up is or talk to people on the phone is that people are a lot happier. They are happier because they understand what they're supposed to be doing, and they actually think that it's worthwhile to do it. Whereas before they were not quite sure what they were supposed to do, and they were frustrated for the same reasons that you were frustrated.
That's right.
Yeah, so they were like, I call these people and I don't get the information, and they want to give me all this information, but I'm stuck in this product owner role, so I'm not allowed to have that conversation with them. Now I can call them up and say, how are you? And they say, crappy, and here's why. And I'm like, great, tell me, and I'll fix it,
Right.
Because it's a problem, and I can own it, or I can hand it to another problem owner, or, we can work on it together, or whatever.
Yep. I mean, I think, all that stuff, and for me, I can't remember what I was going to say. I had a thought, but it's gone.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I'll take responsibility for that.
No, it's good. I was listening to you too. You were on the right track. I just can't remember where I was going. The other thing I think about, about changing the structure of the organization and the way that we changed it is, I talked about it a little bit with you, Jim, before. I think it actually plays with Conway's Law in a really interesting way, which is having a lot of different product owners really fragmented the products so that our architectures look different. So in other words, just like Conway's Law says, the architecture was reflecting the organization that was building it very clearly. And people were fighting about teams and who owned which person on which team, and so there was a lot of tension around ownership of things, and the result of that was that the architecture became really fragmented, right? So even though we were working I spent a huge amount of time, we all have to use the same technology, same language, same frameworks, but they would all build their own little silos of the framework, which was like, I kept on being like, no, stop doing that. Stop building your own silo. Build, we sell one product. Build it all together. But when we started doing it, the kind of collaboration at the product owner level, the concept of ownership of team didn't make sense anymore. So the team assignments became more fluid, and then when the developers were freed from being owned by a single product and product owner, then they started saying the same thing I was saying, which is, why the hell do we have 6 versions of the same thing? We shouldn't do that. That's dumb, right? So it was really interesting to see Conway's Law snap into effect again when the organization became more malleable and focused around specific problems as opposed to specific products. The architecture followed. Right? So the architecture moved in the direction we wanted it to move in. Very, to me, like one of those Deming Akoff moments where it was like, oh, right, the system was breaking the teams, not the teams. It was really interesting for me.
Yeah. That whole product of our environment issue.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to add anything to the end of that, Corey? Very good.
I would say it was also, another example of the dangers of modeling, right? That you had decomposed the problem along the wrong dimensions first, and that if you had chosen a different parameter, and when you did finally discover the right parameter to decompose first, then that yielded a much more sensible structure.
Yep.
And it says something about, human fixation on their models. They confuse the model for reality, and then they don't know why they feel so much pain.
Yeah, well, and then also that model, you don't just create a model and then tomorrow create another model, because then you'd freak yourself out by switching from model to model to model every day. So once you buy into a certain way of viewing a system, you're kind of bought into viewing it at least until you can prove to yourself that it's not valid anymore. But the problem is that the more time you go into it, the more you've invested, and the less likely you are to disinvest yourself from that same model. Yep. So you become basically addicted to your adherence to that particular way of viewing things.
Yeah. So the problem is that it's unrealistic to expect that everybody's going to be able to achieve the same level of detachment about these things that some of us might.
Yeah, definitely.
That's why we're here, right? So it's a good thing, right? It's like there's a place for us in the world.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the thing is that's one of the things that I really appreciated about Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow book is he specifically says several times, knowing your foibles does not make you immune to your foibles, regardless of what they might be. And so being able to say, we know that we should be more fluid in how we set up our systems isn't going to remove any of the political or social pressures to keep those systems in place. Because like Microsoft or AT&T or the Library Corporation or anybody else, they can't afford to change their processes every single day.
That's right.
Nothing would ever get done, because you'd be like, well, now it'd be like, today going in and rearranging the furniture every single day.
I think that one of the things to watch out for with the fluidity and maybe how to measure good fluidity versus bad fluidity is the doom loop cycle. Like, so the doom loop cycle to me is this idea that, like, well, that plan didn't work because we didn't estimate well enough. So if we could just get more accurate with our estimates, the plan would work better. So we'll spend more and more time on estimates and less, and we doom loop it, right? So if the structure's just not working well enough because the rules aren't clear enough, if we just make some more rules, then this structure will work better, right? So it's like this idea where, if you enrich the model too much with too much detail instead of clarity, that's really the doom loop problem with models, right? So like trying to make sure that you keep the models at a level where they could be malleable is the value to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and the thing is that if you are introducing ideas that can change the way that groups work, those ideas can come from one of two places, from people's observation of reality or from somebody else's mouth. I don't think there's really two other places that they can come, or any other places that they can come from. So it's either going to be a reaction or it's going to be a prescription. And so the question is, when people decide that it's time to change, what's the right amount of change? Because if we say that, if we start to change our processes in order to understand what that change was resulted in, we need to follow that process or that new process for a given period of time. And if we say we're doing waterfall and we all of a sudden start doing XP, it's going to take a really long time to figure out what the impacts of XP are, because it's a complete changing of everything, and we're going to need to start to, really, really measure what's going on so that we can start to tease apart all of the different social changes that have just happened because of this massive change. Whereas, that's one of the reasons why when we work with teams, we try not to change their original process, but put up a Kanban and say, we just want to see what's happening. And it's kind of like, we want to see what happens when you guys are confronted with what's really happening.
For my teams, the first time we put up a Kanban board, they were like, we don't know what happens. They didn't know how to map it. You guys still there?
Yeah.
Jim might be gone.
Oh, yeah, I think Jim timed out. I think... there it is.
There we go.
Okay. There's also a thing I think that happens about mutual knowledge, right? That you might deep down know what the problem is, but you don't know that the people around you also know that same problem exists. And part of the value of a visual control is that it's a medium through which people can communicate mutual knowledge. Or acknowledge their mutual knowledge, and sometimes that just flash of insight happens where it's like, oh God, we already know what's wrong, and we already have ideas to fix it. We just didn't know that. I didn't know that you knew.
Right. Well, and the other side of that, many times when you start going through a value stream mapping exercise, you find that a lot of people, a significant percentage of the team agrees on a significant percentage of the process. But that percentage is significant enough to make everybody think that they completely agree.
Sure.
And so the discrepancies in each of those areas are the parts that cause the fighting, that cause the disagreements. So putting it up on the Kanban, especially when you do the first value stream mapping, you'll put it up almost instantly. You'll get the first value stream up there in 5 minutes easily. And then you'll sit there all day long talking about minor differences in opinion about the way that things actually work. And then people also do things like, they'll say, well, I do this and I give it to them, then they give it to them, then they give it to them, and then we have product. It's like, really? Yeah. Always? Well, sometimes we skip them. Well, really? Always? Okay, well, sometimes these guys give me work back when it doesn't work right. And then you end up with all of these arrows and a much more complex view that no one even acknowledged to themselves beforehand. They just kind of felt like they knew it. But being able to elucidate it, oddly enough, allows you to elucidate it.
Yeah.
So, when I talk about visual controls with people, Kanban boards and stuff like that, one of the things that I think is really valuable about visual controls, as a photographer, I spent a huge amount of time talking to people about that words weren't the only way to communicate, right? So words are really, really specific and often not ambiguous at all. They have specific meaning that, or at least within your culture, your terms mean specific things. Pictures and visual things carry with them a natural form of ambiguity that allows people to tell stories in different ways. And so one of the real values for me about a Kanban board is that people can come to an agreement that it looks right without defining what that means verbally. And then from there, they can find interesting patterns and problems and then discuss, oh, look at that thing that's happening over there all the time. Now let's describe what it is. I mean, it's very much like Corey was talking about, this idea that the visualization of it gives them enough ambiguity to expose it and talk about it by seeing it first for a while and then saying, oh, now we all kind of agree on it. And it's something we should work on and fix. And that's part of the way I like the visual nature of it. So I don't know, it's something specific to me as a photographer, that the image of it allows a lot of room for a different form of storytelling, I guess.
It's kind of like, I can't define a bottleneck, but I know it when I see it.
Right. Well, I don't know where it's going to be, but when it's up on the board, I can see it pretty clearly.
Yeah. The absolutely fascinating thing I've seen in visual controls is that it enables people to perceive different timescales than we usually see in conversation, right? So when we're talking sort of at a certain speed and thinking at a certain speed, and that may not allow us to really observe things that happen at a dramatically different speed. But I used to, go stand and stare at the board for 10 minutes a day, and sometimes after 6 weeks, I'd come, I'd have some flash of insight that I couldn't possibly have gotten from, having a momentary conversation about the board or just looking at it once. I actually had to experience the disclosure of a process over a period of many weeks in order to see it at all. And I've had that experience several times, and I've heard other people talk about having that experience. And I think that's a great part of the power of visual controls, because it's kind of this cognitive prosthetic that allows you to see things on different time scales that aren't sort of normal for human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think, my immediate reaction to that, or my immediate kind of visceral reaction to it is having played the Git Kanban game. And I realize it's kind of an engineered experience, but it's exactly that experience to me where I'm like, oh, since the game I can play like, 6 months of time in 10 minutes, I can see the patterns all of a sudden so quickly. It's really was enriching for me. And then I could go back and look at Kanban boards and see those patterns in different ways. So that, like you're saying, that variability or the scalability of the time element is really interesting to me. It also, frankly, after I played the Git Kanban game, I came back and I was like, we think, as software engineers, we think that we move so fast. And really, I don't know that we're not moving really fast often. We're moving kind of at a reasonable clip. But like, I go out to my support guys who use a Kanban board, and they're moving quick. Like, they do something every 10, 15 minutes. And if they don't, they fall way, way behind. Software engineers, we do something every day. So I think that's kind of interesting to kind of get that perspective as well. It's kind of, I don't know.
Okay. Well, let me move the ticket over, unless anybody wants to wrap this up, or shall I just move the ticket?
Well said.
Moving
We got a lot of mileage out of that.
We did indeed.
So that's it for episode 4. Please tune in next time for episode 5, which has the provocative title, Profit is Still Important and the Age of Monstrosity. And that will be the last installment for Corey and Jabe, and then we will move on to our next set of talks. So we'll see you next time.